Good evening and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. Tonight I'm going to go through an overview of the tall ace of spades shots. Everybody's probably familiar with this one. It was one of the early videos that came out that records not only the first shots but just about every other volley that occurs. The quality of the audio is, mediocre at best. Anyway, this recording occurs on the east side of the venue near this exit onto Giles. And this is the video. And I'll just play the first few seconds so everybody gets familiar with it. Now immediately you would notice that there's some sounds in the background. And I'll get into that in the analysis of the video. Yep, and there we go, good old bar stool. So anyway, this goes on, and right to the left here is where the some of the VIP sections are. The overall video itself takes a path once the action starts. He exits onto the Giles, goes north, and then eventually up here onto Reno Avenue, goes west, and then heads a little bit north on Las Vegas Boulevard towards the Tropicana before the video ends. So let's take a look at this video from an audio analysis perspective. I've already loaded this audio up, video if you want to call it for that matter, but just the audio portion is shown. And we're going to start right at the beginning because there have been some claims made early on, and some people to this day still make that claim, that the first 9 seconds of this audio contains gunshots. It does not. And what it contains, as some have discovered, is that there is a flaw in the camera where when you're not connected to Wi-Fi, it's a GoPro camera, that it has some interference with the audio recording. And it's fascinating to look at this because it does in fact look similar to gunshots, but it's throughout the entire video, which would mean that there would be more than 10 minutes of people firing rounds constantly. So right off the bat, if you look at it from my perspective with these spectrograms, you come to the immediate conclusion that that's not even remotely possible, because 10 minutes of constant firing would be, my goodness, that would be, I don't know, let's see, if you're going to 600 rounds per minute, that'd be 6,000 rounds, and there certainly weren't 6,000 rounds fired that evening. So anyway, let's take a look at it. The first 8 seconds or so, here they are. Now I've changed up the way I'm looking at things, and this I'm only going to be using, I'm going to be using one big screen so that we can see in great detail some of the things which occur in this audio. And so I don't show the power spectrum, I don't show the waveform, but if I need to, I can add a layer. So for example, if I want to see the waveform, I just go and add a new waveform layer, and I'll just do I guess I'll do just channel 1, and then we could see it right here, and we could, have it adjust itself, expand it out, all those niceties. But I'm not going to do that for the moment. And back to looking at the sound. So on this frequency spectrogram, we see at the bottom there's some little blips of things going along. And so if we go along over to, there's the seconds are counting off, 4, 6, 7, 8, then the music begins. But the sounds at the bottom don't disappear. And if we take a closer look by using a log frequency on the left instead of a linear frequency scale on the left, over here is the left, then we can see, this gives us a better perspective on the lower frequencies. And so we can see these segments of energy. Now if you take a look at this, it looks very regularly spaced. It's kind of spiky, like a percussive sound, which a gunshot is a percussive sound. And so if you didn't know better, didn't have any experience, you'd look at that mean and say, whoa, gunshots. They are spaced about 0.107, which, as we all know, but 100 or 1/10 of a second, which is what these are, is just about the frequency at which these gunshots occur. So that'd be a little bit less than 600 rounds a minute if it were gunshots. And if we expand this out to a large scale, and we notice then we can measure the frequency, which is below 300, which is a little bit low for the 223 round, but still possible. But it has characteristics which, if we look real close, let's measure the width of it. The typical muzzle, this can't be supersonic cracks, because supersonic cracks occur at higher frequencies. So this would have to be strictly muzzle blasts, and with a width of, or duration of, 20 milliseconds. And there's the first red flag indicating and almost exclusively eliminating this as being a gunshot sound, because the muzzle blasts are on the order of 1 to 3 milliseconds. So we could rule out almost immediately, just on that measurement alone, that this is not a gunshot sound. But the fact that it occurs all throughout the video or tape, and the fact that there's no corresponding supersonic cracks, meaning no bullets came flying out that could be heard, and you would never hear the muzzle blast without hearing the supersonic crack, unless it was just a gun or a fake device. Now, don't get me started on fake devices, because even fake devices approximate gunshots much better than this signal does. But even if we crank up the gain on this, well, let's just go whole hog and go there. You can see from this spectrogram that where the black was, that there's some sounds back there, but they're not percussive in nature. They're sort of long and drawn out. That up there at a little above 2,000 hertz is probably a siren in the background, and I don't know what this is. Probably wind noise or something. So anyway, let's get back to looking at this on a linear scale. So on the linear scale, you can barely see these things, little blurps. So let's pick another region and see if we can continue to see that sound, or let's see what that sound looks like. We'll go way out here to the end, and again you can just barely see it at the bottom. And if I bring it up on log frequency scale, once again you see it's still there, and we can measure it and notice that it's the same signal. It's still approximately 1/10 of a second, 103 instead of 102nd. That was just a rough measurement. And so we have that same signal running throughout the entire video. Now if we shrink the scale down and we go to somewhere in the middle of the video, let's say, then we see that there's a lot of energy in this lower band. If we go to the linear scale, we can see bigger humps. So on that continual sound, where we had a sound that was pulses of energy at approximately 1/10 of a second, this is a little different. This is much this carries a lot more energy, and in this case their duration or width is, let's say, if we measure one, is about 227 milliseconds, or 2/10 of a second. Now that in terms of audio and gunshot sound is just like forever. So this isn't that background sound. This isn't a gunshot sound. And if we lower the gain to try to get a little bit better perspective, we might see, we begin to see that there's basically a primary portion to that signal, followed by a secondary portion, which is somewhat weak. And the primary portion is about 44 milliseconds. Once again, that's 10 to 20 orders, or 10 to 20 times larger in duration than a regular signal. And the gap between these signals, and they are regular, is on the order of half a second. So we don't quite have a 50% duty cycle here, but these are pretty long. So at this point I would pull up the waveform and look at these things, and I would see immediately the nature of them. And so what we see, let's see if I can get that a better color. Hopefully that's more visible on your screen. But anyway, they don't just start all of a sudden, they sort of ease themselves into it and then have this stronger pulse, and then they taper off. And it takes quite a while to taper off. In fact, it takes, as we said before, on the order of 0.2 of a second to taper off. And so their frequency, what was their frequency? If we go back over to that, and we can, we're on 1024, so that's a good frequency estimator window size. We can look at these and see that they peak out at about 112 hertz. And their primary peak is at 70 hertz. So it's slightly above the frequency of power lines, and they occur at half-second intervals. Well, if you listen to them, you get a much better idea what they. This is the reveal for this sound. Just listen to it. Okay, and basically that's what a footstep when you're moving fast sounds like, and you're a big body. This is the oscillation caused by your feet hitting the ground, and that's a dominant signal that occurs in most of this, and it poses a lot of problems when you're trying to listen to faint sounds. So for example, you see here that in this region there's almost nothing back there in the background at this amplification level, and then you have to go to great amplification. We could hear them and hear the vocalizations begin to occur, but by the time we can even see some of the vocalizations, this energy down there just completely dominates the lower frequencies, which shouldn't be too much of a problem for detecting the high frequency peaks of supersonic cracks. But this is so loud that it sometimes can overwhelm the dynamic range of the recording device and leave all these other signals kind of in the dust. Okay, so we've covered two things so far. We've covered the background noise, two types of background noises that occur throughout the entire video. We've covered the quote-unquote first 8-second sound, which is not gunshots, but in fact is a defect in the camera when it's not connected to a Wi-Fi. And then we've covered these other signals, which are footsteps, which cause resonance in the body, and that gets picked up by the camera. Okay, so 2 down and a few more to go. So if we go back to the beginning of the tape over here, and then, cut the gain back down so we can get while the gain's up, let's notice something. First off, we see that there's a lot of energy up here, and there's a lot of spikes, as we call them. And remember, spikes are what we're looking for detection of the supersonic crack. And so here we have spikes, and let's take a close look at one. This for example is one. It isn't just a spike, it's a spike followed by something. And in this case, that's pretty indicative of a percussive instrument that has that first initial impulse and then is followed by the sound that comes afterwards, be it a drum or a cymbal or something else. And so if you listen to this, you can get a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about. Hear the drum, bum, 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 bum. And in this case, you can't really hear the other things going in there, but in other segments of the music, you'll clearly hear the cymbal, and it has a slightly different thing. These big long lines of one constant thing are, the guitar, or these squiggly up and down ones are the vocals, and down here you'll have other instruments kicking in at different notes. Okay. And as many people notice, that music goes on quite a while before we get into the real action of the evening, which was the gunshots. In looking at this waveform here not waveform, but a spectrogram, you don't get an overall feeling for what's happening in the signal for the entire length of the video. But if we switch over to the waveform, and if we don't allow it to make automatic adjustments, and then we increase our window size to cover vast portions of the video, then we begin to get some feel for what's going on. For example, these peaks indicate, strong signals somewhere that might be percussive sounds associated with gunshot here and in all these regions, or they could just be music, drums, and things like that. But you can get a little bit of an idea, particularly if we rotate the gain down, as to what this whole thing looks like. So let's do that until we get the entire video of, 8 minutes and 39 seconds on the screen. So let's pull up a pin here and get a decent color. So here you'll notice that there's, I think I want it bigger than that. Here you'll notice that there's a segment which looks like a square signal associated with gunshots. This one is because they're loud and above the rest. This one probably has something in there. Not clear exactly where from this signal. There's probably some other regions in there too. Then we'll notice also that there's this little group and this little group, and then some lower ones. So I would just go immediately to those sections and start looking at them. So let's pick one. Let's pick this one right there. So let's get rid of that markings. Grab the signal and go right to it. This is a waveform plot, amplitude versus time, and I start breaking it out. And all of a sudden, the nature of the signal begins to appear. And we see a couple different things in there. There's some regular patterns on a large scale, and then there's some fine patterns on a smaller scale. For example, that has some fine patterns to it, but overall there's some big things. So let's measure this. So if we measure from this one to that one, we get half a second. Oh, that's our old friend, the footsteps. So that's what footsteps look on a large scale. And then if we were to bring this fine pattern into play and break it out and start measuring it, the gap between it, then we see it's 1/10 of a second between them. And that might be a gunshot. In this case, what was recorded was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shots. Okay, so if we plot back over to our spectrogram, then indeed what we see is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with some other noises around it, that these are in fact supersonic cracks. And faintly down here you'll see some muzzle blasts. So what we see there is there's a couple different things going on here. First we have the steps, the guy walking. Here we have some supersonic cracks. This region of these finer things here are muzzle blasts. And then buried way deep down inside are these little spikes that are from the GoPro. So there's a lot going on here. And that's why I say, and even if we turn the gain way up, what's going on here? So we got, oh, that's because we got the wrong tool on, that's why. There we go. So even if we turn the gain way up, you see that things kind of get cluttered. But there's plenty of information. That's why this video, unless I have to actually go to it for a specific purpose, is not generally used much by myself in analyzing these gunshots. Now, if I want to see what happened specifically with it, of course I'm going to go to it. And there's a lot of other good things happening in here. that I can dig out. So let's shrink it back down. We're on the spectrogram view here, and you can see that the duration of this thing, was somewhere from there all the way over to in there. Okay, and if we wanted to, we could measure it grossly. That is, get a rough estimate of width. Well, that would be if I could manage my little drawing tool. And so here we would measure it to be approximately 9.39 seconds in duration by observing when these things start and stop. Alright, now that occurs somewhere relatively close to the first shots. So that, I believe, would be volley 2. And as you'll notice here, that volley 2 is not completely and entirely consistent. That there's some stuff going on in the middle that's not gunshots. And there's stuff going on in the background that's not gunshots. And neither the muzzle blast, which are really dominant here, nor the supersonic cracks are consistent throughout the entire video, or throughout this region of the video. So there would be a fair amount of information there, but it would be hard to extract. And for this video, unless I need something specifically, I'm just going to make some general observations on it. So if we back up in time to this region right there, just by double clicking on it, we'll once again see these little up and downs, and so we begin to think that we got another volley here. And if we crank down the intensity of the gain, we see that we still have trouble recognizing it. But for me, it looks like it starts here with something and goes all the way out to right about there, I would say. So again, 9.6 seconds, roughly speaking, for that volley. But once again, you notice on the bottom here, let's go that at the lower frequencies, the steps or something dominate. So let's cut the gain way down and see what happens to that low sound. Yeah, once again, if you focus just on those low frequency things for the movement of the person and the resonance of the body when the steps occur, you can't see much else. If we put this on a linear scale, i.e. the scale over here is equal in proportion to all frequencies, then we can probably observe a few other things. Because now that lower frequency down there is such a small portion of the overall screen that we can begin to see some other things happening. So for example, here you'll see those fine structure of the volley a little bit better. Particularly if you expand it out, you'll begin to see some of these vocalizations or screaming a little bit better. And you'll notice there's this huge region in the background where we don't see anything. Well, there has to be something there at some point in the video, otherwise this whole screen would stop at a lower frequency. And so to try to figure out what's back there, I will run the amplification up huge and observe that, we start to see some stuff, and but it does look like it has a cutoff point of about 15,000 hertz. So there's something else going on up there that I don't understand yet, that I'd have to look into to figure out why the spectrogram in this case chose 21,000 hertz as a cutoff point. Because normally this has to do with something they call the Nyquist frequency, is that the largest frequency you can observe is 1/2 of the sampling rate. So, or stated the other way around, the sampling rate is twice the frequency of the largest sample of the largest frequency observed. So in this case, the sampling rate would have to be on the order of 42,000 hertz. Alright. But when you have the amplification up all the way, you begin to lose the ability to resolve what's going on. Except that you can see some real big spikes here. And so if we bring the amplification back down, Now you kind of lose some of that. So let's put it on none. And there we get some of it back. And we see that here's some big events right there. And so I'm going to go over, and you notice that the music, which was over here, comes along, it stops, and it picks up again. So having viewed these videos for long enough, that's that little gap in one song versus the next song. But anyway, or when he said this, for example, the right here is probably when Jason Aldean said we're going to ramp it up a little bit now. So, and everybody who's been around Vegas for a while knows that that's just about the time that the first shots occurred. So, come on now, thing. Yeah, seem to want to give me a little bit of trouble over there. So, here we come to the first shots. So we see 3 prominent signals and a bunch of other non-prominent signals mixed amongst all these instruments and vocalizations and other who knows what percussive sounds. So right off the bat, we could mark these as being, since they're higher frequency, potential supersonic cracks. And if we were to isolate one by selecting a region, let's say that one, let's select a big enough region that would probably catch the muzzle blast too, and say repeat on that loop and then play. Yeah, see, then the amplitude's up enough you can hear it. Alright, and that's clearly a supersonic crack from a rifle. Similarly, if we were to go over to here, do the same thing. Okay, what we hear is a smaller amplitude supersonic crack, followed by a low frequency muzzle blast. So there's the crack and the blast. Okay, and then over here on this one, it looks like the same thing, because if you'll notice, there's a spike here. Whoops, well, that didn't work, did it? There's the supersonic crack here, and then anyway, there's let's see, get it back on my pointer, and then get it back on my pin. We got the supersonic crack there, as I'll mark in green, and then something over here. If we go along, we mark a bunch of them there. The supersonic crack, can't quite catch it, but I think it's there. Supersonic crack there, and then one of these little spikes probably is also a weak supersonic crack, but these lower frequency things are the muzzle blasts. So if we select this last supersonic crack and that last muzzle blast and play it, let's see what we hear. That's precisely what I said. You got a crack and a blast. And that's the nature of single shot gunshot sounds, is that you typically get the crack followed by the pop, which the crack is the sound of the bullet breaking the sound barrier, and it does it for the entire length of its travel, and we just hear one portion of it. And the blast is a single event caused by the exploding gases coming out of the barrel of the gun, and their lower frequency, and that's what we hear. So having once identified that this is a region of interest, I would go to the logarithmic scale so that I can see some of the details of this. And of course now we're going to get that low frequency stuff in there. But if we expand it out just enough, here we can begin to see a little bit more of the structure. For example, on the first supersonic crack, we see that in that upper frequency range of 2600 hertz, right here there's something, and since it's higher frequency, that is probably a ground reflection of that supersonic crack. And so we see all these supersonic cracks are living in the upper frequency range. Upper frequency range meaning above a kilohertz, above 1000 hertz, and extending on up, probably in this case for the loud ones in the 10,000 hertz range. And then after each one of these, we see a bunch of other little things going on. Now, with all this noise going on down here, it's kind of hard to separate out it, but we can see a muzzle blast here, a muzzle blast here, a muzzle blast there, and actually really close you can see 1, 2 there. And then over here for the first one, the muzzle blast isn't as readily apparent, and I'll have to go to another scale to see it. So let's go to another scale and another type of plot. We'll go to the power plot. So we leave all that up there alone. We go to dB squared instead of linear, and we go to the green, which I use for power all the time, which is going to show up poorly here because I was using green to mark them. And then I come back over here and I start looking, and I still can't quite identify it because there's all this other noise up here in the high frequency range, which is a product of the song, which are the cymbals and the drums, mostly cymbals. And here's the drum, here's a cymbal. So, but anyway, we noticed first thing we observed was that there's 2 muzzle blasts occurring, and if I grab that if I grab that 1 supersonic crack and the 2 muzzle blasts and play it, I can't quite hear the second one, but we can see it. So let's get rid of all those there and expand this out a little bit. And if we lower this down to a linear scale, yeah, see, we can begin to get rid of all the noise, and we can start to see things a little bit better. So once again, going back to make sure we can see it all, we can see big one, nothing but, and a big one over there. That's the first one. So that's the second one, and that's something later. So now the question is, we know there's 6 shots. What happened to the other ones? Well, we've identified this is a muzzle blast. Let's mark these in red this time. We've identified this as a muzzle blast. So a muzzle blast here, let's just mark it with an M. A supersonic crack here. A muzzle blast here. Looks like a muzzle blast there. A muzzle blast there. And there. Supersonic crack. Okay. These things over there, I'm not sure what they're related to. So there has to be a supersonic, there has to be a bullet for every muzzle, because a muzzle indicates a round was fired off. So in this case, we're going to have to increase the gain. If it would change for me, I'd be in good shape. Increase the gain until we can see what's going on. Getting kind of hard to find out what's going on. It's starting to look like the well, let's grab a section and listen to it right here. Okay. Nope. All we hear is the muzzle. Just expand it out a little bit. Still only hear the muzzle. So for this video, the muzzle came through, but the supersonic crack didn't. So that begs the question where the supersonic crack is and why we don't hear it on this video. Now, in case you want to start arguing that there is no supersonic crack, as usual, I would say, you got to have multiple references. So for all these first shots, oops, let's get rid of the drawings there. I've gone through with over 20 videos I've selected the 12 that have decent signals, and I've marked, this is what's called corroboration, and I've marked for every one of them what signals are present. So for example, in this case, which is a video I call Stage, we see that there was a crack for shot 1. It was a nice prominent heavy one. There was a crack for 2, a crack for 3, a crack for 4, a crack for 5, a crack for 6, but probably only 3 of them were audible. The 4th may have been, depends, but the other ones in the light green were not. And correspondingly, there was a muzzle recorded for shot 1, shot 5, and very light for shot 6. But there were also reflections and hits recorded, very light hits. That is, hits which occurred somewhere but not extremely close, and then there were reflections. Let's see now. Here's this one. So in this case, I've said that, and the one we're analyzing now, that we can see the supersonic crack for shot 1, 2, 5, and 6, and we can see the muzzle for 4 but no supersonic crack. We can see the muzzle for 3 but no supersonic crack, or very light crack. Okay, and that's what I do for every video. So in this case, we've confirmed what my previous observations tell me, is that there's no supersonic crack reported for shot 4 here, but it was recorded on the Tonelli audio, and it was recorded on the right hand side of the stage, and it was recorded a whole bunch of these bars, like 6 of them, and on the stage. So if you do this analysis and you put them all together, you can start to get a very good idea of what's going on. And as usual, all the muzzle blasts should line up precisely. The supersonic cracks won't, the reflections won't, whether it's a reflection of the muzzle or the reflection of the supersonic crack, because they're location dependent, whereas the muzzle isn't. It's, it preserves the time. So anyway, so back over to this audio analysis. I don't want to get too deep into things here, because we'll be doing another video on the first shot specifically. But what I want to point out is that on the first shot here of this one, which is this little puppy right there, if we expand it out, now this is energy, remember, this isn't log frequency, this is energy, but here we see reflections of this signal. If we go over to the log frequency, and we bring the window size down to 12 so that you can get a little bit better idea, and we go to a log scale, lower the gain so we can see some stuff and other stuff, then we see that the bullet came by somewhere and produced a sound, and then that sound reflected off the ground and came to us also, and then a little bit later something happened which looks like a reflection, a double reflection of both the primary signal and the secondary signal, but it occurred at a time frame of a tenth of a second, which means that whatever it's reflecting off of is a little bit further away. And then here, this is part of a guitar probably, but you see that even the guitar has these little spikes which start to resemble a very weak, let's see where we're at in frequency here. We're at 700 hertz, start to resemble a very weak muzzle blast. So in some cases, when there's background sounds that's going on, it's hard to locate the muzzle blast. But we can see somewhere probably right around in here it occurred. The next thing we'll notice on this, on a larger scale here, is that, oh, I know. Let's take a look at whatever this guitar was doing here, but on a better frequency scale. Okay, so that's how you measure the frequency of it, and you could draw this line here. It's at 570 hertz was whatever that guitar riff was doing. Alright, and then if you travel along here a little bit further, you'll see, I don't know what that sound is, but we could highlight it and play it. I guess it was the oscillation of the tail end of a bass sound. Okay, so, and in this scale, you can, ignoring this crap at the bottom, you can begin to see some of these things appear more precisely. Again, that's a muzzle blast, muzzle blast, muzzle blast, supersonic crack, muzzle blast, 2 muzzle blasts there, and since it's the 4th shot, there's no supersonic crack for it, and for the 3rd shot, it probably was this line going right there. Not the 2nd one, which was a reflection, but the 3rd one. Very, very weak. What does that mean? Well, that means that the bullet didn't pass too close, whereas on these brighter ones, like that one, the bullet passed closer, and on the very first one, come on, baby. I'll change the scale, it's easier to see. He says confidently. Did I pass it up? Yeah, I did, right there. The bullet passed closer, had a reflection, and did some, and then let's see, yeah, the first shot of this, the first of the 6, is much, much louder and much, much closer than either the 2nd one or the 6th one. Alright, on to some volleys. What do these single shots look like in comparison to the volleys? Because ultimately we want to know if they were fired from a similar gun and a similar location. And if they start to look alike, then you can start to reasonably zone in on the fact that they're probably the same caliber bullet and approximately the same location. So if we look at this. So this is volley 2. Let's see what volley 1 looks like. There's volley 1. At the start of volley 1, something big happened by that big upward spike. And then it just went into this normal, fairly low intensity compared to the background sound in the music, a muzzle blast, and the cracks. Okay, lots of audio, a lot of vocalizations there. Big screaming there, big screaming, low screaming, big screaming again, out of control screaming, and then we encounter volley 2, and we see that the volley 2, as we mentioned earlier, has some heavier intensity signals for the supersonic cracks. So if we bring up our frequency measuring tool, or we could do it, actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's take advantage of this paint thing over here and just draw in a region here. I want it green though. Region here where we think that we'll mark it on our screen, where portions of the supersonic crack are, and then let's measure down here. What I'm doing is trying to measure the dominant frequency occurrences for this volley, for both where both the supersonic cracks and the muzzles are recorded, and then we can just tool along, and since that stays on the screen, we can kind of match it to what's happening. Let's see if the first shots, for example, occurred along those same areas. Okay, so approximately, yes, with perhaps a small difference. For example, here you'll notice that this didn't hit the center sweet spot. This didn't hit the center sweet spot. That didn't exactly hit the center sweet spot, and that didn't exactly hit the center sweet spot, but they're close. So that would indicate that they're probably a a different barrel and or slightly different ammo load. Okay, so, but if we come to volley 1, go back over here to volley 1, then you can see that it matches pretty well. Here, you know, it's in the sweet spot down there. Not so much. Up there, there's not enough of those to measure, so we don't know. So let's move on to, let's see, volley 2, which is where we took the measurement. Has anything changed? Nope. And then we move on to the next one, volley. There's some supersonic cracks. Yep, those are identical to volley 2, except that over here the frequency response is slightly different. Not sure why, but it is. Could be many reasons. Camera turned, shooter moved to a different area a little bit. Whole 9 yards. That was volley 3. There's volley 4, which has most definitely a different frequent response. So that's probably a different gun, maybe a slightly different load, looking to be the same caliber because the width of the impulse is the big indicator of the caliber of the weapon, although the frequency can be an indicator also, particularly for the muzzle blast. So let's keep going. That was 4. So now we'll have to jump all the way up to, let's see, I can't even tell where 5 is on this. There's 5, yeah. Okay, that volley we can't tell, but the lower portion of the muzzle blast appears to fall in line with it. But we don't see the supersonic cracks because they're just too low. So let's move forward to volley 6. And here we see that the lower end matches for the muzzle. The intermediate one matches for the muzzle, but there's not enough energy in the, I guess if we crank up the gain we might be able to tell. Yeah, it kind of matches, but not perfectly. Okay, so you can see how you get a general idea of matching the frequencies. Let's go all the way out here to 9 and see what it's doing. Well, that was not even a volley, that was the stupid steps. See, it becomes a little hard to tell the volley. There's one right there. The volleys from the steps on this large scale. And here we see that the lower ones match. This one matches, and that little red spot indicates that this is a pretty good match. So this volley matches pretty well with volley 2 in frequency response. So that'd be a very, very similar gun, probably the same barrel length and probably the same load and probably the same shooting location and probably a very similar camera angle. But it looks, it may be a different location since by now this guy has moved quite a bit. Alright, so now let's go back. So what can we ascertain here? That on first blush, these spikes look similar to the first shot spikes. So that's a pretty good indication that it's roughly the same caliber of weapon, roughly the same type of weapon. Doesn't mean precisely, but you know, this is what you do when you look at this stuff, is you get the first feelings and then you start digging and looking up the numbers and all the other precise measurements, and then you start making conclusions, and you do it for several different videos, which in most cases there's a lot better audio quality to them than this one. Let's go along to a different phenomena which some people have looked at. If you look on this lower scale way down here, you'll see these, which is the waveform scale. And let's erase that crud right there. And shrink it. If we go right to these little spikes on the waveform, this is the first volley over here, and this is immediately before it. there was another signal in here I wanted to pay attention to. And I can't. Let's take a look. Is this? Yeah, these are the gunshots because they have crack followed by muzzle. There were some other sounds on this that sound a lot like guns but aren't. Where are they? I thought they occurred. Oh yeah, just before it. There we go. And then we have volley one. Yeah, here they are. We see these big spikes in here. And they kind of fall into the range of supersonic crack. Okay. But what we don't see is the corresponding muzzle blast. But let's listen to them. So we're going to select this region. Loop it. I thought it hit loop. Oh no, hit fast forward. Okay, well anyway, if we play it, it'll jump back to it. Hear that? They sound a lot like supersonic cracks. But are they? Well, supersonic cracks are very narrow things. Let's look at one up close and measure the duration of it. So to do that, we put this on the 512 window so we have a little bit better idea of when it occurred as opposed to its frequency. And we expand it out, grab our tool and measure the width of it. And this says 7.2 milliseconds. Supersonic cracks are on the order of 1 millisecond. So while it sounds like a supersonic crack, it fails the duration test. Let's see what the other ones here are looking like. There's one. Let's measure its width. Okay, from there to there, from there to there. Let's narrow it up a little bit. Again, 7.2 milliseconds. Fails the width test. Let's look at the waveform. In this case, we're going to need to dump the spectrogram so we can get an idea of what it looks like. Okay. So here we can get a very good idea of what the first exact wave was like, which is what we truly want to measure, although it's not really precisely the first wave. Okay, this is kind of interesting because in this case it says that it's 0.5 milliseconds for the first wave, which could classify it as a thing, but it has that leading wave in front. Alright, so I have not conclusively determined that this isn't a gunshot, except there is no muzzle blast associated with it. And out of 3 shots, you'd expect to hear 1. But hey, you know, there's conditions here. So let's look at this on a different scale and see what we can see. Particularly if we go over to, let's go to volley 1. Hard to see at this scale. Those big things are the footsteps. Or voices. That was hard to tell. I'm not a real good reader of waveforms except for some of the details. Let's look at this, look at this, look at this. Okay, I got to bring my spectrogram back so I can make heads or tails of this. Alright. This is one of the single shots I'm looking at. Okay, let's take a look on the scale and see what it measures. Yeah, see, okay, so I was wrong up front. This is close to a gunshot sound. This is a gunshot sound, right? This is the first shot. And then if we look at the waveform and measure just the first wave, well, it's not a very good wave, that's for darn sure. But if we measure just the first, roughly the first wave, then it's 272 microseconds. Okay, that's a little bit narrower than the other one, but still well within the range of a gunshot. So I haven't eliminated it a gunshot. So it would require further analysis to determine whether it is or is not a gunshot. And I'd have to go back to my detailed analysis to know why I did or did not rule it in or out. Alright. Which will make some people happy and some people sad. Back to looking at the volleys. How long am I into this thing? Okay. Getting a little long here, so I probably should wrap it up. The oh yeah, but let's finish this up before we leave this let's pick why is this getting so slow? I don't know. Oh, because I've got it set so small, that's why, on the window size. Small window size means that there's a lot more calculation to do. Let's see if we can't find a volley on here that's very clear for us to look at. Come on, puppy, I know you can do it. Man, this thing's taking forever. And that's what happened when I asked to my computer to do too much. I got to narrow down what it's looking at. Come on, I know you can do it. It'll eventually get there. Ah, there we go. We're coming into viable region now. Alright. So here we have, I think, the last volley, or next to the last volley recorded on this video, which by now the person has walked nearly all the way to the north end of the venue, and yet we can still see these good quality spikes here. And if we bring it back onto the log scale, no, that's just walking itself. I was wrong. Here's gunshots. Okay, well, I'm going to have to leave this to a different time and a different audio because this one's just too noisy. But I'm curious as to what that sound is. Oh, there we go. You can see what a car horn sounds like. Yep. Okay, well, that's it for this video. We'll catch you in the next one when we review again the single shots, but from a multi-video perspective.